and we can pass on to the next speaker.
Thanks. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for coming. The official question set by the examiners. should the consequences of a crime affect the punishment? And when I was thinking about that, I remembered I had a letter from Jennifer Hart, the late Jennifer Hart, who was at this time Herbert Hart's widow. And this was on the occasion when Jeremy and I had edited a volume which we dedicated to Herbert Hart, and we sent her a copy. And this is what Jennifer wrote. She said, browsing through it reminded me of the discussions that we, that's she and Herbert, had about the appropriate penalty on the careless driver who, coming the wrong way on a slip road, smashed into us head-on, injuring Herbert and me and my son quite badly. He was given a conditional discharge. I, in my innocence, was very indignant. Even Herbert admitted to feeling that the court should have known of the consequences of his carelessness and inflicted some sort of punishment on him. Now, the even Herbert is important because Herbert's official position in punishment and responsibility was against that kind of thing. And when he was himself on the receiving end, he wasn't so against it anymore. But that's an interesting feature of the debate, or the debates in this area, that a lot of people have two sets of intuitions. One set of intuitions that they acknowledge casuistically when they're talking about individual incidents, whether they were involved in them or not, and another set of intuitions that they testify to when they're confronted with theoretical challenges. And I've always thought this is one of the most interesting things about the debate, that theory forces people into certain kinds of dead ends that they shouldn't have been forced into. But the other reason for reading out the letter is that it brings out well, what may be an ambiguity or an uncertainty in which topic we're supposed to be discussing. Because what was going on in the case of the Harts was that the driver was charged with careless driving. Wasn't charged with causing injury by careless driving or any other result crime. He was charged with what criminal lawyers call a conduct crime, careless driving. And the question which Jennifer and Herbert were debating was whether the consequences of that crime, which are not part of the crime, but come after it and because of it, should have been put to the court in the context of the sentencing, part of the trial. Now, these consequences were obviously irrelevant to the conviction part of the trial because the charge was careless driving. And for that charge, it didn't matter whether anybody was injured. But Herbert and Jennifer were debating whether, nevertheless, the consequences might matter for the degree, for the appropriateness of punishment, and if so, for the degree of the punishment that was appropriate. Now, so that's one problem, one interesting problem. When somebody's charged with a crime that doesn't include any causal element, just a conduct crime, should courts nevertheless be able to take account of the consequences of that crime at the sentencing stage? And on that view, I take a fairly dim view of that practice. I tend to think, because I'm the kind of liberal who thinks prosecutors should make their decisions at the beginning of the case and not try to have a second debate later on, that if they want to rely on the fact that somebody was caused injury, they should charge a result crime, one that mentions the fact that injury was caused, and they should be put to the job of proving it beyond reasonable doubt before it can be taken into account, even at the sentencing stage. So I take a dim view of the line that Hart's senior were taking in this case, Herbert and Jennifer, which was that in spite of the fact that it wasn't mentioned in the charge, the court should have been told of the consequences. But I took it, and I'm following here the practice of millions of Oxford students in interpreting the questions set by the examiners in a way that makes them interesting. That's not the topic that was set. The real topic that was set was not about the consequences of crimes at all, but about their results. That's to say, the things that happen and are caused, but not after and because of the crime, but as part of the crime. Right? So, for example, the crime of murder doesn't have death as a consequence. It has death as what we might call a causal constituent, also known as a result. It's not murder until somebody died, and until somebody died because of the acts of the murderer. So I took it that in spite of the use of the word consequences, and in spite of the reference to punishment, that the real question we were interested in was a question about results and criminal conviction. Right? So well, it's a constructive interpretation. It gives me something to say. And that, as you all know, is the point in the exam, to find a way of saying what you have to say. You have to defend yourself. You have to say, this is what makes the question interesting. You can't just ignore the question. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Why should the results of our actions count in deciding which crime we committed? Never mind whether the further consequences of our crimes should count in determining what sentence should be applied for. Why should the things that happen because of what we do belong to the definitions of crimes? So that's about whether there should be result crimes. Now Jeremy took he took that view as well, but that was what the question was about, I think.
Yes.
But Jeremy moved on to an interesting set of puzzles about what we might call the mens rea. Is to say, to what extent should the dependence of the definitions of crimes on results have a secondary dependence on the state of mind of the offender in relation to those results. Now I want to just move back a little bit from that and ask whether the results should count at all. It's a much more radical question. And so I'm just going to, for a moment, just ignore whether they have to be intended or foreseen or all those questions that are next along the road. Just in favor of the first question, whether results should count at all ever.